Hi, and welcome to chapter 12. So, today we're going to be talking about marketing channels and supply chain management. And this is one of the most important chapters that we're going to be talking about. The reason why is that I heard a quote once, and it really stuck with me that it's not, in today's marketplace, it's not about company versus company, it's about supply chain versus supply chain. And I think that's really very true. It's really very indicative of the world that we live in. It's the company that is able to bring the most innovation, the most uniqueness, the most accessibility, and the most price conscious supply chain that is going to be able to win and be successful. So, our case study today talks about Caterpillar. And Caterpillar, even though it might seem like an unusual option for a case study, it really is a good one because Caterpillar is literally a global company. It really doesn't matter what part of the world you are in, if they are using heavy construction equipment, they're using Caterpillar. And so Caterpillar, it's not, obviously, they're not transporting copy paper, right? So, despite the fact that you can go in any corner of the globe and get them, it's a mega thing to transport. And as a result, you have to really be able to figure out supply chain and logistics in order to be successful when it comes to transporting such a major piece of equipment. So what Caterpillar did is Caterpillar really focused on using their dealers and using their dealers to help them understand what the local markets would be like, what their needs would be, and how they can use it to the best of their ability. So they came up with a really unique kind of arrangement where they have independent dealers, kind of like franchises, but they have a global network and they're constantly feeding information, educating, and trying to understand the needs of their dealerships globally. And it has really, really helped them to build one of the most notable and famous and profitable supply chains. So, we're going to talk about exactly what a supply chain is. So, when we talk about a supply chain, we're talking about moving a product from actually from supplier to manufacturer. Sometimes there's a wholesaler, sometimes there's a distributor, sometimes there's a retailer, and then finally to your consumer. Now, that supply chain, or also known as a VDN, a value delivery network, your VDN or your supply chain changes depending on the needs of the organization, depending on who the organization decides to partner with. So later on in the chapter, we're going to talk about if we collapse that supply chain, if we consolidate that supply chain, what it looks like, et cetera, et cetera. But your supply chain is essentially all the different components, whether it is the people who are, manufacturing the supplies, so growing the cotton. Let's say we are talking about a clothing manufacturer. The folks that are growing the cotton, that's their suppliers. Ralph Lauren would be an example of the manufacturer. They may have a wholesaler who deals in having several clothing manufacturers that they are going to be working with. And finally, you have the reseller. So that would be a Macy's, that would be a Nordstrom that is using that good to sell in their store. And finally, the consumer is going to walk in the store and purchase it. So you always are going to have these various different players. But in addition to the players in the supply chain, there are folks who are going to move things from one part of the chain to the other. And those are three different, what we call intermediaries, right? And so you have your marketing intermediaries, you have your finance intermediaries, and you have your distribution intermediaries. So when we think of your marketing intermediaries, we're talking about advertising firms, we're talking about PR firms, we're talking about social media, right? We're talking about any kind of promotional agency that is going to get the word out about one partner versus the other. So, an example would be the advertising firm that comes up with a commercial that promotes Ralph Lauren and then at the bottom says available at all Macy's, right? That's a marketing intermediary. Good. We also have finance intermediaries because how do you afford to get the goods from one location to the other? Who's financing that? How do you borrow? How do you get loans for that? How do you pay for those things? And so those are going to be banks. Those are going to be what we call import banks. Those are going to be any kind of funding agency that is going to help you get your supplies to the manufacturer, manufactured goods, to the retailer, et cetera, et cetera. And the last piece, and perhaps the most important piece, is the distribution intermediary. And the distribution intermediary, they are the ones responsible for getting suppliers' goods to manufacturing facilities, manufactured goods to the warehouse, and then on to the finished, the retailer, and then on to the final consumer. So the idea is that we have all these intermediaries. We have the various different components of the supply chain, and then we have the intermediaries that link each aspect of the supply chain. And so it's very important that we understand all of it. Now, it's also important for us to understand that when we talk about a marketing channel, we're talking about three different things. We're talking about one, what I mentioned, each of those pieces of that supply chain is a channel. The supplier, that's one channel. The manufacturer, that's another channel. The actual retailer, that's another channel. So that's one type of channel when we talk about a marketing channel. Another type of channel will be the selling channel. And when we say the selling channel, what do we mean? Are we talking about selling it online? Are we talking about selling it in the store? So online only would be click only. In the store and online would be brick and mortar and click. So brick and click. And then it would be in the store only would be brick and mortar only. Okay. So you might sell online, you might sell in store, you might sell via catalog, you might sell via phone. So all of these are going to be your different selling channels or your different shopping channels. The last type of marketing channel that we have are media channels. And media channels are the ones, and when we think of a media channel, we're thinking of the companies that are dealing with disseminating the message out to the public. And so that's going to be your TV, that's a media channel, the internet, radio, magazine, print, etc., etc. So I just wanted to kind of cover different forms of channel because sometimes we say channel and people get confused. And when we think about how we decide to choose a partner along our supply chain or along our VDN, we have to always consider our marketing mix. We have to consider how our product is positioned in the minds of the consumer. Now, you might say, I don't understand what's the connection there. Let's think of Whole Foods, right? So Whole Foods is a high-end supermarket that really focuses on organic and sustainable goods. They can't sell highly processed goods and foods that are not good for you, that aren't healthy. That's not going to work with their positioning. When people go to Whole Foods, they expect better quality goods. They expect goods that care about the environment. They expect goods that have what we call a green supply chain or a supply chain that we can trace, that is sustainable, that considered the people element, that considered the planet. So they're going to have suppliers like Cliff Bars, and they're going to make sure they sell things from folks who produce organic vegetables, so organic farms and so forth and so on. They even are going to think about how they can trace the source of every ingredient in the products, right? So they're going to be able to tell you this is coming from organic cotton that was sold in India, in northern part of India, in a farm by this person. And so that is a channel choice that they are going to make because it makes sense for who they are as a store. So the marketing mix, that has to do with place, that has to do with product, that has to do with price. All of this makes sense for who your channels are. So let's think about pricing, for example. If, often you would hear like Infinity, for example, they advertise in their commercial, they advertise that they use Bose speakers. That's a very expensive speaker system. Well, Infinity is selling a high-end car. So you can't sell a high-end car and use a type of speaker that is going to be crappy and of low quality. So when we're thinking of marketing choices, it must all add up. They must all make sense for what it is you're trying to accomplish. And then sometimes what will happen is that a company will decide, I'm weak in a particular aspect of my chain. And so I need to strengthen it up. And to do that, they may make decisions. They may decide that they want to collapse certain parts or they want to partner. So, for example, FedEx decided that one of the things that they were in need of is a place for people to drop off packages that was a retail store, because a lot of FedEx locations were kind of out of town and on the periphery of shopping areas, right? And so they wanted you to not only send letters and packages, but they wanted you to be able to do all of your small business needs in a location. So they partnered with Kinko. And through Kinko, people can go and collect boxes, ship boxes, they can have mailboxes there. So really like a small business hub that allow people to also send a package. And then UPS also has an equivalent. And so FedEx couldn't good well not have a store like this, given the fact that UPS has a store like this. UPS couldn't have a store, couldn't let FedEx only have a store without them having a store. So when we think of the supply chain, a lot of times companies will choose a particular partner because they see themselves lacking in a particular area. And so they choose a partner who's going to really elevate them in that area. So when we think about channel members and who you choose as a channel member, we talked about making sure it matches with the supply chain and the marketing mix. But then recognize there are also unique things that you have to think about with a partner. Suppose you require a product, a supply, an ingredient that is of low, it's hard to get, it's scarce. And so you have to find the right kind of partner because you can't just pick any old partner, right? So a lot of times when we're talking about supply chain, we have to think about who's going to be the best partner for what we're trying to do and what we're trying to accomplish. And then you often will use your partners not only to supply an input or to sell your good, but your partner is going to, in the supply chain, one of your channel members, they're going to provide important information. They're going to tell you, for example, if you are a computer provider, you know what? All of the new products that we are getting, they have built-in USBs. We know you guys don't have a built-in USB. You need to probably get one. Basic things. Or everybody has a high definition camera. You all don't have a high definition camera. The sales are down. We think that's the cause. So a lot of times you can get critical information from your partner in the supply chain. They also help promote, because a lot of times there's something called co-op advertising, and co-op advertising means that Target is going to run an ad for Thanksgiving and they're going to feature certain products in those ads. And those products are going to help Target pay for that overall cost of advertising. And so they're going to help in your promotion. So you want to pick the right partners. And sometimes on ads you will see exclusively at CVS or exclusively at Target retailers. That's promotion that is taking full advantage of who your partner is in the supply chain. Or you might think about matching your suppliers and your channel partners with how you want your product to be perceived. So I think we talked about this before. There isn't a Tesla dealership on every corner because Tesla is really operating out of a really exclusive supply chain. And so they ship directly from the manufacturing facility. So they have looked at their supply chain a little bit different and decided they want to cut that aspect out of things. And so, you have to think about what's the physical distribution, what's the financing, how much risk you're taking, whether you want exclusive or inclusive channel members and so forth and so on. So I think it's very important to really match our channel members with our marketing mix. And then you have to think about, are you going to have direct marketing channels or are you going to have indirect channels? How many intermediaries between you and the final consumer? And sometimes that's a little scary for some partner members, because the more people you have in your channel, in your supply chain, then the more profits are kind of fading away from you, right? The more middlemen, so to speak, the more they have to be involved in the cost of in your profits. And so sometimes, and then the other thing is that the less control you have, right? If this thing goes along the line 10 times and there are 9 other members, well, that's profits that's cutting into, but that's also control that you're losing. So the closer and tighter you have your supply chain, the more control you have over your supply chain. And you see figure 12.2 has a lot of different options, right? You can decide that you want to be producer and go straight to the consumer. And so an example of that, what would be a good example of that? That you Apple, you produce the product, you also sell the product directly. Um, but you can also do multi options, right? So you also produce the product and sell the product in Best Buy, sell the product in Target, sell the product in Walmart, and they get to the consumer. You also might have a situation in an international market, for example, where there's a wholesaler or a distributor that you work with, and they get your product to particular retailers who then get your product to the consumer. And then we're talking about business consumers. We also have a lot of different variations of this product. So as we talk about channel members, we have to think about how product flows and how cash flows. So you have to think about terms of payment. If I have a product, how long is it going to take for who I'm supplying the product to pay me? Do they have a 30 days, a 45 days, or a 60-day payment? Because that could also be a problem. So you want to choose channel members that have good payment options as well. You also have to think about, is there conflict within your channel? And if there is conflict within a channel, it means it occurs among firms at the same level. So maybe you are Apple and there's conflict between Target and Walmart and Best Buy about your product, and you want to reduce that. But you could also have vertical conflict where, and I've heard this, some retailers quarrel about this, that Apple really resists any kind of price discounts. They don't like retailers to reduce the price of their products. So let's say, for example, at Thanksgiving, Target is running a sale on every single other computer except Apple. And Target doesn't like that. And so they want to lower the price of the Apple products as well because they think it's a good draw. And Apple may put some restrictions on them for that. So you can also have conflict within vertically along your supply chain. And then you have to think about, do you want a conventional where, just like I described, supplier, manufacturer, etc., or do you want something that is innovative and different where you collapse it, or you look at how you want to change it up? For example, Netflix. So your typical arrangement with Netflix would be what? Would be Netflix goes to a producer, a content producer. They get particular content and then they air that content. But maybe Netflix decides, well, that makes them too dependent on particular producers. They don't want to always be going to Disney, for example. And so maybe Netflix decides, I want to produce my own content. Similarly, Disney is a content producer. That's what they do, right? But then all of a sudden, Disney recognized that they wanted to have more control over their ability to charge for their content. So what do? They then have a Disney Channel. They came out with Disney Plus. So different providers along the chain may decide that they want to organize it different way. And so you may have a vertical marketing system when you talk about your supply chain where you own production and distribution. And so I would say Gap, Old Navy, that's the same, Gap, Old Navy, Banana Republic, and Gap, they all own and distribute. They have retailers. They are the retailer. They are the producer. You might also have a contractual one where you have manufacturer-sponsored retail franchise options where maybe it is like a Firestone, for example, where Firestone also manufactures tires, but then they have a retail kind of franchise arrangement. They don't only sell Firestone tires, but this is a good outlet for them to also sell their goods. And then you might have something where you have a regular arrangement with a retailer, but you may have an exclusive arrangement, or you may know that you are their biggest supplier in that market. So when you're thinking of the competition for your supply chain, you have to recognize that companies at the same level sometimes they work together, like Sprint and T-Mobile and Verizon. They've all kind of come together to make sure that prices don't drop below a particular level. Or you might have some hybrid where a lot of firms have collapsed and come together. And then, you don't have um, a lot of independence, and you don't have a lot of players in the game. And then you might sometimes decide that you want to mix it up, that you want to completely change how it works. So there's so many distribution systems that are out there, and different companies decide that different things work for them. So how do you decide what decision is best for you from a channel perspective? And keep in mind that when Amazon first started with their channels, they only sold books. They were simply a wholesaler slash retailer for publishers. Then they got into all these other things. Then they started producing their own content. And now they have Amazon Music, they have Amazon Web Services. So it all depends. Supply chains can evolve depending on what the need is, what they're about, who their customers are, what is happening in the market, et cetera, et cetera. So the first thing always is to understand what our consumers want, what works for our consumers, what our consumers are looking for in a supply chain, and then setting the objectives, right? Figuring out what it is you want to accomplish, what it is you want to achieve, and making sure your supply chain makes sense for that. So, for example, let's say you want a supply chain that is a green supply chain. Well, then you have to make sure you have suppliers, producers that have the goods and services that you want, or alternatively, you can do what Walmart did, where because they have so much retail power, because they're such a big player, they can go to their partners and say, listen, we are not going to sell your product if you don't make some changes in how you produce them. You have to have a stronger sustainability record. You have to show how you deal with waste, et cetera, et cetera. So they have the power to do that. Or sometimes you may decide that you want to own certain aspects of your intermediaries. Walmart again decided they wanted to buy their trucking service so that they would not be dependent on distribution intermediaries. So it all depends on what it is you want to do. Sometimes companies find themselves in a situation where they want to change all what they were doing, and they just want to mix it up completely and go a different route. Or sometimes a different route may evolve, like when outlet stores came into being. Before outlet stores, a lot of these producers never had a direct interaction with their consumers. But then here comes the outlet option, and it gives them the opportunity now, whether you are Vans or you are Levi's or you are Calvin Klein, you now have a store in an outlet. And that gives you an opportunity to interact with the consumer in a very different way. And so you have to kind of think about, when you're selecting your channel members, who do you want to put that trust in? Because remember, they're partners with you in producing, selling, and getting your product to the end consumer. And so you have to think about your reputation. You have to think about, does this suit with who you are, how you've positioned your product. You don't want a channel member that is too expensive or too cheap, right? You want a channel member that adds value to you. And that's why the whole name Value Delivery Network. You want a channel member that adds value. That's so important. And so how do you motivate your channel members to have the same quality that you do? If you are Dillard's or you are Nordstrom's, how do you make sure that you have channel members that kind of mirror your commitment to your consumer? Because you don't want to be selling goods in your stores that are cheap. You can't have a high-end reputation and then people are buying goods and they're falling apart. That's not going to make sense. So you really have to think about who your channel members are and how able they are to provide the same level of, the same kind of positioning that you have. Then you have to think about things like, what kind of distribution you want. Do you want a distribution that's inclusive or exclusive? You don't want to be a dollar store on every corner or McDonald's. You really only want to be available. You want to be a Maserati kind of dealership. You're only going to find them some places, sometimes, et cetera, et cetera. So you have to think about that as well. And then you also have to think about, outbound, inbound, things like just-in-time logistics, where as soon as this product leaves the shelf, like the last one on the shelf, boom, you're getting a a new shipment coming in tomorrow, because you don't want to have things just sitting in a warehouse. You want to be able to get things from the manufacturer just as they're almost about to finish on your shelves. Of course, just in time manufacturing is not as easy as it sounds, right? Because somebody has to hold it somewhere. If it is, I am not going to order new Dove soap until I see we're down to like 5 on the shelves, then who's holding? I can't now start to make Dove soap when you only have 5 on the shelf in Walmart. So just in time sounds good, but at the end of the day, it's a lot more involved in that you have to really have manufacturing holding the product somewhere. So just as it's needed, it's shipped out to the retailer, and so forth and so on. And then you have to figure out what are the goals of your logistics system. Do you want to maximize the consumer experience, or do you want to minimize costs? Because sometimes you can't have all of the above, right? And I know, for example, I was talking to the folks in UPS in Costa Rica. And Costa Rica is now, I think I mentioned this before, Costa Rica is now the hub for all distribution in South America. And they control the supply chain for a lot of their partners, right? So companies will come to them and say, hey, we want you to be the person who manages all of our goods, in all of getting our goods from our warehouses in North America to our end consumer in South America. And they manage the phone line, they keep the product in their warehouses, they manage the warehouses, they send it out to the consumer, and they also are in charge of bringing the product from the consumer. The consumer has returns back to the original producer or supplier. So it all depends on what you want. And then what do you want to do? What do you want to just have everything transported via air, rail, truck? How do you want to transport? And I think Amazon really has, they really have mastered this thing of logistics, because I always joke and say, when I can get something on my doorstep in 2 days, it's hard for me to understand why your company would take 10, right? So as we think about logistics, everything from how my consumer pays for goods versus how my consumer ships goods versus how my consumer interacts with the purchasing of the goods, all are part of the ultimate value delivery network, all are part of the positioning of the consumer, and all have to fit in to the marketing mix. Okay? I will see you in the next chapter.